The woman who once called Giorgia Meloni a danger to Europe is now sitting in silence, watching her authority weaken from the inside. Brussels is tense. Conversations between Rome and Washington are happening constantly. And Ursula von der Leyen has made a statement so cold and carefully worded that even some of her allies see it as a sign of political defeat. This is not rumor. This is not online gossip. What is unfolding between Meloni, Donald Trump, and the European Union is one of the biggest political shifts of 2025. And the consequences could reshape the balance of power inside Europe. Giorgia Meloni did not wait for approval. While Ursula von der Leyen was in Brussels working on new EU regulations and preparing policies she expected member states to follow, Meloni boarded a plane to Washington. Not Brussels. Not Berlin. Not Paris. Washington. When she arrived, she did not present herself as a subordinate partner. She met Donald Trump directly. They sat together, shook hands, and discussed cooperation in clear terms. The message was simple. Italy's position in global politics is not limited to Brussels. As soon as those images reached international media, reactions inside the EU were intense. Some officials described the move as worrying. Anonymous diplomats told reporters it showed division within Europe. But from Rome's perspective, it was a strategic decision. To understand this moment, you have to go back to 2022. When Giorgia Meloni became Italy's first female prime minister, many in Brussels were cautious. Her political style was strong, nationalist, and direct. Soon after her victory, Ursula von der Leyen publicly reminded member states that the EU has tools to respond if countries move away from common values. Many interpreted that as a warning aimed at Italy. From that point on, the relationship between Rome and Brussels was tense. Publicly, there were meetings and formal statements. Privately, there were serious disagreements. Meloni criticized EU migration policies, arguing they put pressure on Italy's borders. She questioned strict green energy timelines, saying they could hurt Italian industry and raise costs for families. She also pushed back on fiscal rules and agricultural regulations that Italian farmers complained were too restrictive. Each time Brussels expected compliance, Rome pushed for flexibility. Then came another turning point. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, he began strengthening relationships with leaders who supported national sovereignty and stronger border policies. Meloni quickly positioned Italy as a close partner. This was not a symbolic meeting. It was a clear signal. By deepening cooperation with Washington, Meloni showed she was willing to work directly with the United States, even if it complicated her relationship with EU leadership. Inside Brussels, concern grew. If Italy could strengthen direct ties with Washington while remaining a core EU member, it could inspire other countries to pursue similar strategies. That possibility raises serious questions about unity inside the bloc. Emergency discussions reportedly took place within the European Commission. Legal experts reviewed what options the EU has if a member state acts independently in foreign policy matters. But Italy is not a small economy. It is the third largest economy in the Eurozone and a founding member of the European Union. Pressuring Rome carries risks. Publicly, Ursula von der Leyen has remained measured. She has avoided strong public confrontation. But behind closed doors, reports suggest discussions with key leaders have intensified. At the same time, Rome appears confident. After meetings in Washington, details began to emerge gradually. There was no dramatic announcement. Instead, information surfaced carefully through selected media briefings. What became clear was a framework for closer economic and strategic cooperation between Italy and the United States. This included discussions around energy cooperation, defense coordination, and trade expansion. While not presented as formal treaties outside EU law, the political support from Donald Trump carries weight. For Italy, this matters. For years, EU fiscal rules have limited government spending and economic maneuvering. Access to stronger American investment and market cooperation could provide Rome with additional flexibility. And that is where the tension lies. Because for Ursula von der Leyen, EU fiscal discipline has been a key tool in maintaining policy alignment among member states. If Italy finds alternative partnerships that reduce Brussels' leverage, the internal balance of power shifts. This situation is not just about two leaders. It is about competing visions for Europe's future. One centered on deeper EU integration under Brussels. The other focused on national sovereignty combined with strong bilateral alliances. The outcome is still unfolding. But one thing is clear. The political landscape inside Europe is changing, and the relationship between Rome, Brussels, and Washington is now at the center of that transformation. Those limits that once kept Italy tightly bound to EU control now seem weaker. And the impact of that shift was felt inside the Parliament building in Brussels, where the European Commission is based. But the economic agreements that Giorgia Meloni secured in Washington are only part of the story. The more sensitive issue for Brussels is political support. Donald Trump did not just meet Meloni and send her back to Rome. He openly praised her in front of cameras. He described her as a strong, sovereign leader and said her style of leadership reflects values he supports. That public endorsement matters. It gives Meloni international validation that Brussels cannot easily dismiss or undermine without risking direct tension with the White House. For the European Union, this creates a difficult situation. Trade tensions between Washington and Brussels are already sensitive. The last thing Ursula von der Leyen needs is for disagreement with Italy to turn into a broader diplomatic conflict with the United States. Inside the European Parliament, reactions have been intense. Several left-leaning and centrist members of the European Parliament have urged the Commission to consider strong measures against Italy. Some have even mentioned Article 7 of the Treaty on European Union, a mechanism designed to address serious breaches of EU values by member states. They have called for financial pressure, formal criticism, and clear consequences. Their concern is not only about Italy. It is about precedent. If Italy can strengthen independent ties with Washington while remaining central to the EU, other governments might consider similar paths. That possibility worries EU officials deeply. However, Ursula von der Leyen faces a serious dilemma. Triggering Article 7 proceedings against Italy, a founding EU member and the third-largest economy in the Eurozone, would be an extraordinary escalation. It could divide the EU at a time when member states already disagree on Ukraine policy, defense budgets, migration management, and climate transition goals. Such a move could also strengthen Meloni politically at home, allowing her to present herself as defending national interests against outside pressure. Because of these risks, Brussels has not acted aggressively. Instead, reports suggest a quieter strategy. Rather than direct confrontation, von der Leyen has reportedly been in contact with other European leaders, encouraging them to limit Italy's influence in key discussions. This approach would reduce Rome's informal power without launching a dramatic legal battle. It is a strategy based on isolation rather than open conflict. But many analysts believe Giorgia Meloni anticipated this response. One common mistake critics make, they argue, is assuming she will eventually step back under pressure. So far, that has not happened. In fact, challenges from Brussels often appear to strengthen her domestic support. The more tension grows between Rome and Brussels, the more the political debate inside Italy intensifies. Now, with visible backing from Donald Trump and steady approval ratings at home, Meloni is reportedly exploring a broader strategy. This strategy goes beyond trade agreements or bilateral meetings. It involves building relationships with other European leaders who share similar views on national sovereignty and EU reform. This idea has been developing quietly through private discussions and diplomatic contacts. While no formal bloc has been announced, political observers note increasing coordination among several governments that have expressed frustration with centralized EU decision-making. Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, has long taken independent positions within the EU. But Hungary alone has limited influence. A larger coalition would be a different matter entirely. There are reports of discussions involving leaders in Central and Eastern Europe, as well as in parts of Southern Europe, where economic pressures and fiscal rules remain controversial. Across the continent, political movements emphasizing sovereignty and domestic control have gained electoral strength. The political landscape in Europe is clearly shifting. Standing beside Donald Trump, and reinforced by her domestic mandate, Giorgia Meloni is positioned as a central figure in that shift. Whether this results in structural reform inside the EU or simply deeper division remains uncertain. Ursula von der Leyen understands the stakes. In a recent statement that drew attention across political circles, she signaled that the European Union may need to move forward without relying on leaders who challenge its core direction. The phrase many insiders repeated, "She is no longer with us," was widely interpreted as a political message rather than an emotional reaction. It suggested that Brussels may have accepted that cooperation with Meloni on its terms is unlikely. That does not mean open confrontation is inevitable, but it does signal a serious shift in tone. Every strong political declaration carries consequences. As Brussels considers firmer responses and Rome continues strengthening alternative partnerships, a major question remains. Has the balance of power inside the European Union already begun to change? While EU leadership debates its next move, Giorgia Meloni appears focused on building networks that do not depend entirely on Brussels. The European Union may be preparing to distance itself from her approach. But the larger question now is whether she has already created enough alliances to ensure that Italy is not standing alone.